Can you hear me okay over there, Miles? Cool. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to January 22nd, 2019 edition of the PSCP Forum. My name is Quentin Boos. I'm an intern here in the Office of Process Improvement. And yeah, we have a great session for you guys this morning. And yeah, let's just kick it off. Oh, do I need to be over here? Perfect. So, like I said, I'm Quentin Boos. Tess Ellender is our co-producer. She, because of the weather, could not make it into CDOT this morning, so she is helping us out from Colorado Springs. Thank you so much, Tess.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Tess.
And then Michelle Malloy is going to be our chat monitor this morning. She is the senior program manager for our Office of Process Improvement here. And then Niles will be doing the technical support, making sure everything runs on time and that everybody's muted when they need to be and unmuted when they're not. So, cool. Moving right along. I'd like to thank the PSCP board for putting this on. Again, that's Michelle, thank you, and Megan. And then also Claire Anderson, who I don't believe could make it this morning. So once again, please remember to unmute your phone and or microphone if you'd like to ask questions to the presenters or at the forum at the very end. Just, any sort of engagement you'd like to do, just please remember to unmute yourself. So we have a great agenda for you this morning. Right now we're going through opening and announcements, and then Betsy Bayshore of the Value Management Office from the Ohio Office of Budget and Management will be presenting, followed by our own Megan Brown. And then at the end, just an open forum for everybody to kind of discuss presentations or discuss other change management initiatives throughout your agencies. And then yeah, we should close here at about 10:20 or 10:30 this morning. So we like to begin every session with a quote. This one is from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I believe I'm saying that right. He was a poet and novelist from Germany and also a statesman. So he says, life belongs to the living, and those who live must be prepared for the changes. And so I think that just kind of talks about the inevitability of change, and I'm sure that you see it throughout all your agencies and just throughout your lives that, you're always going through changes, whether it be, little changes, even this morning, having to get up early in order to make it into CDOT on time, or if it's a big move that you've got going on, and that always be prepared and be flexible, because life belongs to the living. And if you're not changing, then I guess you're not really living. So just a summary, the purpose and direction of this forum is to create a resilient group of change management professionals and learn from each other and build a knowledge base that we can then branch off of and increase our skills, and then inspire and lead change throughout the world, whether it be here at CDOT or whether it be globally. So then with that, we ensure that those impacted by change are successful with that change. So one more time, your voice is very important to the success and value of the community. So whether you're presenting, sharing, completing the survey at the end, or asking questions, that's how we get the most out of these sessions and out of these surveys, so that we can learn from one another. So, and for one last time, please be sure to unmute yourself when asking questions or participating. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Betsy Bayshore.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Betsy Bayshore. I've been with the Office of Budget and Management at the state of Ohio for about 6 years now, and I wanted to talk to you this morning a little bit about benefits realization and the role that change management plays in that. Being the banker for the state, return on investment is pretty important to us. And I hope to share some of our lessons learned and things like that. I have to disclose, I lost my voice last week, so I have my colleague Troy Gazette on standby in case I lose my voice again in the middle of the presentation. And if you have trouble understanding me at any point, please let me know. And I should have remote control access.
I think you need to click your screen in order to have remote control access.
There we go. That was it. Thank you. What I wanted to cover this morning, little introduction, obviously, a primer on value management and benefits realization for those who might not be familiar with it and how change management relates to that, what we've done in driving value and benefits achievement in Ohio, and a little bit about our case studies and tool sets that we have. So the Office of Budget Management and Value Management Office was formed in 2012. We monitor on average about 60 projects at any given point in time. And we've looked at over 100 large IT projects in the last 5 years. Through what we've learned, we espouse a total lifecycle benefits management from concept all the way through closure of the project, and really have served as a champion for organizational change management within the state of Ohio because of its criticality to benefits attainment. Our first experiences when we were trying to identify state of project benefits and return on investment and trying to track that were not easy. There were a lot of gaps that we noted. And early on, we identified that failure to change as the #1 contributor to failure to achieve outcomes. Project management maturity is also a significant issue for our state. And it's one that we've learned the hard way. No amount of change management can overcome that. So benefits realization, we call it value management. Value management is the public sector term that we adopted, really because if you say benefits, people think health insurance. So, but benefits realization is the industry term, and it really helps organizations better define the outcomes and manage to those outcomes during a project. And all of our projects involve some kind of change. It really emphasizes the what gets measured gets done, and keying to what you want to accomplish as your benefit is an important step that we work with sponsors on fairly frequently. When using benefits realization, if you follow the techniques, it can help improve your chances of achieving your project goals by up to 80%. And we've found, both in the industry and in Ohio, typically only about 10% of projects achieve their stated benefits. In our case, during the project process itself, we call it in-project value erosion. We give up a lot of the facets that would help us be successful in achieving our benefits. And that's a significant contributor to lower than expected benefits realization and outcome achievement. So you say only 10% of projects achieve outcomes. It's kind of an astounding figure. The corresponding one to that is about half of change projects fail. And in the private sector, a large number of those are such a high impact to a business that they can cause business failure as a cascading effect. So in government, we're kind of insulated from that, but it doesn't reduce the pain of having a project failure. But why does this happen? Those fundamental policies and procedures don't change. We don't go back in and look at how we're doing our day-to-day business. And so process improvements are a really big component of this. Change isn't well managed. Employees pursue business as usual. It's what they feel safe with, it's what they're comfortable with. Sometimes that change involves letting go of something that one controls. It's a transaction that you hold power over. And so that's hard to give up that control. And sometimes the goals and the path to achieve them are really unclear, they're ill-defined, and then they don't get managed through the project life cycle. So a little bit on driving value and benefits achievement. Oops. So a little bit about how we've tried to ride herd on this. In defining our project values and goals, traditionally there's the attempt to try to dollarize everything and say, hey, we're going to have a big savings here. Being in the Office of Budget Management, we actually expect to see that savings And so we've counseled people really define what you're actually trying to achieve. And we do this through brainstorming at the executive and sponsor level very early on. And what does success look like? What is your definition of a successful outcome? And then how are we going to measure that? What is 1 or 2 or 3 key factors that show you've been successful? And we stress changing the language around that from return on investment and benefits to what does success look like? Because for so many of our sponsors who are unfamiliar with project management, change management, and benefits realization, it's something that appeals to them a little bit more and something that they can more easily define. It's just a little easier to use than asking what the goal is. We talk about what that return on investment or benefits that they're seeking is going to look like. It's often not monetary. And we coach our executive sponsors on selecting targeted measures and then focus on how time and resources are then invested to make a change or achieve a desired outcome. Because that time and resources to make the change is an afterthought in many projects to the technology that we're going to purchase or the tool that we're going to implement. And so we really stress having change management being a big component. Ensuring alignment between your business strategy and those project outcomes, using that vision of what success looks like to formulate project goals and keeping that up in front of your project team continually so you can refer back to it and say, does this help us achieve our goals? Does it help us achieve success? And those goals become your focal point through planning and design. You can actually look at the goal list, and if something comes up and it doesn't further achievement of that goal, maybe we don't need to do it. But if it's something that's really critical to the achievement of the goal, this is where that in-project value erosion takes place. If you look at that goal list and you need it, probably need to keep it in no matter how hard it is to do. So one of our recent examples, and we'll talk about the predecessor project to this in our case studies, we are starting another attempt, it is our third, e-procurement modernization effort. We spent a lot of time with the sponsor group discussing what do you really want this to do? Because we've had a couple other bites at the apple and we've not been successful. And they came up with 3 things, focusing on best value, not necessarily lowest price, but the best overall value for agency customers, empowering agencies to do transactions at the agency level and speeding up their time to procure. And then reflecting a business-friendly climate to make it easier to be a supplier in Ohio because our supplier community is constrained and we would like to open that up to other players. We talked a lot about then what does success look like for each outcome. And for each of these 3, there's another set of 3 under each bullet that are those measures that we can target to. So empowering agencies to transact and to do their own contracts, giving them a shell that they can work from that's pre-approved. We would want to see X percentage of contracts run through our new system. And so they're able to really drill down on the things that are measurable that they can track over time and use that to guide the project going forward. One thing to consider is kind of the 80-20 rule in measurement maturity. And the 80-20 rule, 80% of your problem comes from 20% of your source. We use it as kind of that 80% is good enough. Focus on the 80%. Focus on what you have the ability to influence and has the biggest impact. We found in our state experience and in my prior experience with local governments don't have really sophisticated management tools often. And those that have sophisticated management tools and data behind it, they've made a long-term investment. So there are some states and local governments that have those things. But in general, that's not the norm. We found that at the state of Ohio, our baseline data and benchmark comparisons are rare. So we front load that in a project and strongly recommend it. We know a change needs to happen. Often we don't need to know the magnitude because we don't know where we're starting from or where we want to go. And so changing that so that you can track the benefits is important. When data exists, that baseline data can be misleading. If you go into our ERP, it says that it's about a day and a half to process a PO from a requisition. That sounds great, but that's how long it spends in our system. It doesn't account for the month it spends outside the system before it actually gets entered. And so many of our measures are deceptive because they don't encompass the entire process. Our process documentation and the understanding of influencers in the process is rare. And the role of human change in solving a problem is not well understood. We encounter obstacles frequently with measurement. There's analysis paralysis. I get hung up on the details. There's a lot of fear of scrutiny. I'm going to be punished if I give you my data. If it's good, you'll take something away from me. If it's bad, I'll be punished. There's a desire for perfection, particularly working in the financial community. We want the number to be right to the penny. Now, sometimes we're right to the first comma, and there's a lot of trailing zeros. And then there's a failure to commit. It's not something that we want to put our all in. We've had a significant impact over the past 5 years, and people are adopting measures more frequently, but it's still a little bit of an uphill battle. And for this 80-20 rule, looking at that 80%, when we first went to measure our Ohio Shared Services AP processing function, nothing had been done to set up baselines or benchmarks or a measurement system. And when we looked at what is involved in AP processing, 98% of it is personnel time, people doing the work. Our first agency that went in and did a deep dive into the measures spent a lot of time figuring out how much postage and how much paper and the copier cost. And it was such a small fragment of what the costs actually were. We said, don't even bother with it, because the time to get that data, 80% of the time collecting was on that little tiny fraction of information. And so we've really tried to focus on where our big bang for information is in each one of the metrics that we collect against. So a little bit more on our approach. Simple, clear measures. They've got to be really crystal, unambiguous, and a small number of them, because agencies get measurement fatigue, and so we try to keep it to 3 to 5. Agencies and participants have to agree that this measure reflects a successful outcome, and they have to own it a little bit. And in owning it, we ask them to self-report. They help us develop the baseline, we validate, but they report on a quarterly basis, and we watch to make sure it's reasonable. We're not going to quibble over the pennies, of course, but by self-reporting, sometimes that's very illuminating to the agency actors, because they understand how they are doing, and they have a lot more ownership in the measure. The other thing that helps is understanding how everybody else is doing. And so we use a lot of encouragement, but sometimes we use peer pressure too. And with each of our measures, we try to publish how other agencies are doing. So you can see your own agency amongst your peers and understand whether you're a high performer and somebody that they're going to look to, or if you're perhaps not performing so well, maybe you want to ask how agency B has achieved better success in outcomes. We strongly support change management and adoption to enhance performance, and in our more recent projects, we talk to each sponsor about bringing a change manager on board very early in the process and keeping them on board. Our newest e-procurement effort probably has the most intensive change management we've ever done, but again, it's our 3rd time through the rickets on this, and so it's important that they're successful in this iteration. Having that support to manage change and adoption is really important, because we gap on that fairly frequently. Focusing on the big pieces of the metrics, and then really understanding that some information puts us in a more advantageous position than no information. Again, that's been hard for our financial community to accept, because they like perfection, but understanding directionally correct is better than no idea where we're going. That's been really important to communicate. And last, that broad sharing of best and recommended practices. We try to do that with each of our client agencies and share lessons learned among them. In growing our capacity around measurement and return on investment, again, start simple, celebrate success, encourage, cheerlead. And we had to be prepared to support learning and development in this area, because it was a real gap. It's not something that's taught in schools. And we also evangelize the use of benchmarks, and we share them widely. Our most recent iteration on benchmarking is in our budget process and looking at average spending in certain technical functional areas. And we're going to share that with our chief fiscal officers in February to show them where their agency is and how that ranks in relation to other agencies. And we really encourage and support estimating. Estimating is not widely used at the state of Ohio, and so we've coached agencies on how to do that and how to tailor that estimate down to something reasonable by the time they're ready to ask for an allocation in their budget. But it's a scary proposition because, again, people are afraid they're going to be held to it. And we're very explicit about saying this is an estimate so that people don't have as much trepidation in that. On measuring that return on investment or your benefits, the value of your project, this has really required a lot more preparation and project definition early, very clear statement of purpose. It requires a lot more transparency into a project. A lot of our projects used to happen kind of behind closed doors, and surprise, we're done at the end. This is much more collaborative and open and expressing where the project is and where it's going. We also are now requiring the inclusion of specific techniques like organizational change management to help bring us forward. And we're being more selective in which projects go forward or how quickly they do. So if it doesn't seem that you're ready, maybe you wait a little bit longer until you are ready and you've talked to the right people and gotten the right stakeholders on board. And the last piece that we've done here is to provide enterprise and agency tools. Ohio is a decentralized state government. Each agency kind of owns its own processes, but in that, many of them don't have project and change management practices. And so we've developed an online toolkit, which we'll show you at the end, to help support this. And we've made it very, very simple, very short, tried to boil everything down into a page or two for each step of the process. But we find that agencies are relying on this a little bit more to help guide them in their project processes. Some of our risks and weaknesses that come up really, sorry, Troy, come up time and again, sponsorship. ProSci talks about this being the most key factor. For many of our sponsors, they are a sponsor once in their career. And they don't have time to learn how to do this and then practice it. And so we provide sponsor resource materials, and when we bring on a change manager, encourage their support of the sponsor so that that individual can be successful, because some of our projects are so large that when they go poorly, it's career threatening. And so we want to make sure that the sponsor has the tools they need, feels supported, and is able to guide their project effectively. That weakness, the use of organizational change management, and some trepidation on the business side in instituting change management, letting someone else help and support and speak for the project. Project management, sometimes just the basics. Those are absent in some of our projects, and so that transparency component, we look very closely at how the project is being managed to make sure it's effectively bringing forward the scope of work. Being prepared, just generally being ready for a project of this size, having your resources aligned, having your resources workload well-defined, and having backfills as needed. Some of that is still a weakness within the state. Managing risks and issues. Oftentimes we don't want to bring up something unless it's really, really an issue, but by that point it might be too late. So bringing red flags early to the table, calling a project yellow and orange earlier in the process. Again, weaknesses that we have and things that we encourage. General expertise, excuse me, around the area that is being changed. That subject matter expertise, and also in the project process, making sure that the individuals have sufficient understanding of what should occur to know what to prepare for, what to expect, and the like. Business process change, still a weakness. It's tough to get people to change. In our environment, it's tough to get people to give up paper. We hear often that we have customers, constituents who may not be mobile enabled, though our libraries all have computers, and 80% of Ohioans access the internet via a mobile device. But there's that tough giving up paper part that's hard for some of our agencies. And that understanding of systems related to business processes and applying a systems type of thinking to a project, that remains a weakness for our projects in general. So a few case studies real quick. What we've learned, and these are kind of our highlights from the past several years. Our first one is Ohio Shared Services Accounts Payable. This was initiated on the heels of Ohio adopting PeopleSoft as its ERP for financials and human capital. OSS was initiated in 2008. It consolidated back office functions for cabinet level agencies. Originally, it looked at both financial functions and HR, and the potential return on investment was cash, hundreds of millions of dollars over a 10-year period. We did one or two of those verticals, not the whole thing, and our initial adoption was very slow. It was a multi-year process. And we had a lot of competition between what we call the Big Mac and Whopper philosophies. Big Mac, you get it one way, the Whopper, you can have it anyway. And we had several agencies that still expected to get a Whopper at McDonald's. And so trying to change that culture and understanding expectations was a little bit of a struggle. Our contractor who was leading that also did not understand the complexities in the state process at all, nor understood how we were using our ERP. There was no expected process change at the agency level. That has come since then. And there were some quality issues on the shared services side. These challenges were overcome through really focused onboarding. There was participation incentives or pricing incentives for agencies and some standardization among those participating agencies. And this project to date has returned about $20 million to the state coffers. We found that many agencies, as they transition to shared services, would no longer be able to go back to doing their own accounts payable. This is our graph from, I think it was our last budget testimony 2 years ago, kind of showing the dark blue line on the left is the baseline. So that's what an agency would have spent based on how they did business prior to adoption of OSS. On the right-hand side, you've got the agency direct cost, what they spend, the OSS processing cost, that's in that yellow, and then the charges to agencies are in light blue. And so we're paying off our capital investment, but you'll notice over time the cost to the agencies have gone down repeatedly, and that overall baseline cost is fairly high level. And I'm seeing some questions pop up, so if I need to be answering questions as we go, folks, please let me know, okay? The next one, Ohio Marketplace e-catalog. This was our prior attempt at procurement modernization. Our first attempt was adopting PeopleSoft Financials. But the Ohio Marketplace e-catalog, that was initiated in 2012. We used a product through SideQuest. The potential return on investment, again, was cash, potential hundreds of millions of dollars over a 5-year period through discounts and prompt payment and early payment. Adoption was very limited, and our e-catalog really competed with how agencies did business, and there wasn't a strong effort to change that way they were doing business. The project struggled from not understanding the complexities of agencies. There was limited selection of the catalogs, the pricing wasn't great. There were other value add portions of the project that were canceled, and users did struggle to use the system. There was more focused onboarding after the first month or so. We increased the minority business inclusion so that agencies could hit their MBE spend buying out of the catalog. And that version 2.0, our e-procurement, really took a lot of its lessons learned from Ohio Marketplace. This project was terminated about 2 years ago that we rolled back off of the software. And so I mentioned e-procurement. The need has not gone away. We still need to modernize, and it's strongly built on the lessons learned out of our prior two experiences. So far, the project has struggled with gaining the confidence of decision makers in its ability to deliver, because we've tried this before. There was also a timing issue with the administration change. We have a new governor who started last Monday, and our acquisition process took almost 2 years. So it was very slow and laborious. Our current state with this project right now, the lessons learned have been applied. There was strong change management presence. There's been strong tracking of utilization because we turned on our release 1 in the middle of December for P-card purchases. And on day 1, there were transactions. Not a ton, but that's better than we did with Ohio Marketplace, where we had 2 weeks with no transactions. So people are actually using the system and giving it a try. The initial rollout for that P-card catalog was to 5 pilots. We're using the fail fast, fail small rule. The next big thing up, release 2, is a significant change in heavy lift, and so we'll see how the project does with that. Our third project, voice over IP telephony, VoIP. This is usually a win for governments, a pretty easy one with a payback period of 18 to 24 months. The state initiated this in 2012 through Cincinnati Bell. They actually lowballed the cash return on investment. It was several $1 million over a 5-year period. But we found this wasn't as easy as we thought it was going to be because there were some abandoned phone lines that were locked and IP address conflicts and things that the state had to remediate as it went through the process. The risks weren't well understood, and there were some significant technical lifts involved in getting agencies onto VoIP. And there were additional products that were not sufficiently mature to support the state's need. And so we had to roll back off in some cases and then roll on again when the product was mature enough. The project did overcome those challenges, and once the technical issues were solved, implementation was very smooth, and additional projects have been added to enhance the service offering. To date, they've saved more than $5 million, and some agencies experienced a 2/3 reductions in their telecom costs. So it was a pretty big savings for them going off copper lines. And the last project that I wanted to mention in our case studies is IT optimization. And it's a case study in 2 respects. One is around the efforts that we did to consolidate IT infrastructure, but also it's kind of a lesson in looking at how you measure things. IT optimization was initiated again in 2012, but we didn't calculate an ROI. We made some statements about how it was going to save, but agencies have provided feedback that in some cases they feel it's more costly. There were difficulties in initial implementation because there were errors in planning, there was an ignorance of dependencies, costs were high, and service was not great in some cases. IT optimization has struggled because the risks were not well understood, and some of them required significant time and technical attention. And agencies didn't have a compelling reason to join. There was no incentive to move because the direct cost appeared higher and outside of their control, and so it's easy for them to push back. The program is still ongoing. Many of the challenges have been overcome as quality has improved and costs have gone down. There's about a 90 to 95% adoption rate after 5 years. However, some areas have been descoped and some areas were focused a little bit differently because of the problems with implementation. In the case of descoping, there are some remote locations with our Department of Natural Resources that there's no way that we can actually get an internet line out to them any level of cost reasonability. It's just off the charts. And so we took those off the board for network consolidation because we just can't get to them. So the publicized return on investment for this project is $162 million over 5 years on hardware, specific elements of hardware. However, we have seen IT spend double on the financial side since 2011. And that's my next chart. And a little bit to how narrowly do you measure something. This shows from 2008 on the bottom, 743 million, to 2018, we're spending 1.2 billion for technology across the state at the state government level. From left to right, agency IT labor, agency IT spend, this is all agency spending, including consultants. Enterprise services is what's provided centrally. You've seen that grow over time as we consolidated services to the enterprise level. Capital spending, and then our OIT service charges for our central agency service charges for those enterprise services. Again, you've seen that grow over time as well. And when we look at this, it's good that some of our spending is at the agency level, but our savings metric doesn't tell the whole story. And so we strongly encourage agencies when they're selecting metrics to pick balanced metrics. Without that, you might end up with something that doesn't tell the whole story. And so while the IT optimization project and program talks about its savings, agencies will talk about how they're spending more. And when you have those conflicting benchmarks and conflicting results, it's very hard to tell who's got the right answer. So a little bit about why we found some projects achieve their benefits and others don't. For projects that achieve their benefits in the end, change is managed. It's managed closely and strenuously because that is the biggest predictor of success. The sponsor champions a project. This is someone's baby and they love it. It's not assigned, it's a torch they're carrying. Project goals are clear and unambiguous. something that you can explain in 30 seconds in an elevator ride, and those project parameters are tight and focused. So you have an end destination and a point of completion. Burnout and attrition happen on every project. Preparing for it and managing it is critical to success. Having team chemistry, both internal to the state and with the supplier, is critical. That supplier is not there to fail, not here to harm the state. They're here as a partner, and treating them as such helps enhance the success of a project or likelihood. And then that sponsor having subject matter expertise, having some kind of background so they can make key decisions related to the project along the way. Now, we do come across a lot of projects that by the time we get to them, they're starting downward a little bit. And our recommendations to agencies that are seeing that downward trend, recommitting to the goals, deciding this is what we plan to do and it's still important to us, analyzing the feasibility and how realistic that business case was, taking some time to reflect and course correct, acknowledging mistakes, working to resolve them, and moving forward with a clean slate, making sure that project reporting is transparent and accurate, and then applying a lot of humility and courage, because redirecting a project that's failing is an uphill climb and it's tough. And so when someone's taking on a failing project or trying to redirect it, we recommend, get your courage medal, because you might need it along the way. It's a hard thing to do. I wanted to close with a little bit about our toolkit that we've developed for agencies. This is available on our Office of Budget and Management website. It's obm.ohio.gov, and we are on the far right-hand side in other divisions and services, and at the very bottom of the drop-down list, not because we're last, but because value management is alphabetically the last in the list, and that will take you to our main page. We've developed what we call the value management framework that is focused on business outcomes and their return on investment, and really speaks to both the IT community and project sponsors, project managers, and change managers. There's a large number of change tools available as part of our resources. And then for people who are just getting started in the project process, we literally have a little cookbook for them. I'll show you on the next slide, but this is from our resource page, and you can see that there's a number of resources available on the right-hand side. Some of the things that we have available for our sponsors, the role of the sponsors, what they do at each stage of the project. And then we have these little briefs for some of the more technical aspects of what a project sponsor, manager, change manager needs to do. A little cookbook for each stage of the process, and we've adopted a 6-phase, with concept being the first. We call that phase 0 because it's your thinking phase, and you can take as long as you want. But we talk you through the steps, and each one of those steps has hot links to the tools involved. And so we promote this with new projects and also with our lean and change management groups, so that they know the tools available, and when they're working with first-time project managers, first-time project sponsors, they can provide them these resources to help ease their transition into the project world. So a little bit closing thoughts, just real briefly. Narrow scope and clarity of purpose. We found that to be really key. The role of change management, making sure a change manager is a part of the team, has ownership in the project early on, also very important. Realizing that benefits realization is a journey, and it requires maturation along the way. Depending on your state or government, it could be very different. You could have metrics in place, or you could be at the point of baby steps like we were when we started. And really emphasizing that estimating is okay. I'd rather have some understanding of how your agency is doing than no idea whether this is helping you or not. And again, directionally correct, completely better than uninformed. So take the best information you can get at the time and work to improve it as you go along. And I know we've had some questions along the way, so how does that work? Do I look at the list, or?
I'm here, Betsy. I just wanted to say that was a marvelous, marvelous presentation, and I plan actually on calling you later.
Okay.
So to talk more about how you do things there. But anyways, there are several questions. The first one was, would like to hear more about how you have evangelized the use of benchmarks.
Evangelize the use of benchmarks. We just talk a lot about it when we're talking about projects and benchmarking against pure comparisons. This most recent thing we've done with the budget, we told agencies, we've got some baseline benchmarks. We would tell them if they asked, but we planned to let them report candidly first before saying, here's where you should be falling. And benchmarks aren't good or bad. It gives you a target. You may need something different, but we try very hard to make these low risk discussions, and we try very hard to make sure that people understand that they're not going to be punished for trying to look at how they're doing, because that fear of punishment is pretty great. And when you raise that, it destroys that trust and ability to work towards a better outcome for the whole.
Yeah, I agree. And we have that same fear in the state of Colorado. I think it's I see it all the time at CDOT, talking about, am I meeting my benchmarks? Am I meeting my metrics? And for it to be a negative thing to not do it is wrong.
Yeah.
So we need to be understanding and then, take a snapshot of our current state so we can move forward to that future state.
Well, and what I tell folks is you meeting your benchmarks may not mean that you're doing anything wrong. It may mean that we're doing things wrong. And so we need to do that. And with our shared services, that was really important for agencies to hear, that it might not be me. It might be my suppliers turning in their invoices wrong. It might be something at shared services that they don't understand about my agency. And so making sure that the participants understand that's a point to start a discussion, not an end result. I think it helps.
I agree. That's awesome. Let's see. Where are we at? Do you work across all agencies? If so, how do you get engaged? Is it mandated, or are you selling your services as a benefit?
Well, we work across all agencies now. Until 8 months ago, we were constrained to enterprise projects, but the state implemented a major project oversight policy on June 1st of 2018, after a long journey to get there and understand why it was important to do. And that gives us purview over any project of size, so $2.5 million and above. And it's a combined team between the Office of Budget Management and our Department of Administrative Services. So now we work across all agencies, and it's soft mandate. So nobody comes banging on the door if you don't do it. But if you don't do it and you try to go to market and we've never heard from you, then we don't issue your request for proposal until we talk. So it's only taken a couple of examples, and I think the message has gotten across, but we also try to be very helpful. And so even our biggest resistors along the way, we try to connect them with services within the state, because we do have a lot of resources that agencies don't know about. And I had one client in particular who, it took us 4 months to get engaged because they kept pushing back. But our last conversation, he needed data from the Secretary of State's office. Another project needed it, and our enterprise services went and got it for him. And myself and Troy, we were the ones who were able to connect all those resources together. And it made him a happy customer. So he will talk positively about our services going forward.
That's really good. Very interesting. So the policy that's that you talked about, 2.5 million and above, is that just oversight of all those types of projects? I know Georgia, if I remember right, Georgia had a statewide policy that OCM would be applied to any projects 1 million and above. So that was interesting.
They built in OCM. Ours, again, it mentions OCM and references it, but you won't be held at a gate for not having OCM yet. Okay. We're the 38th state to do something like this, so we have a lot of examples, but we're also probably one of the more agency as independent actors type of states, and so working towards an enterprise way of doing business has been challenging.
Right. Interesting. Okay, thank you. The next one is how to demonstrate value of OCM strategies early on in the project. Usually the focus is to use change management to support project management training and communications only.
And I don't have a good answer for that outside of what we've experienced here. We've got some really splashy big failures that we can point to. And we have the information and data on those, and we can say, look, this is what happened last time. We're going to use change management to make sure it doesn't happen this time. And so far, when we had change managers go out to the agencies and work one-on-one with the individuals who are in the process, it has brought them along significantly faster. And we've seen much deeper adoption of the new processes. So we have at least a few examples where we can point to it and go, here's an example. We also have a lot of lessons learned where we didn't anticipate change management needs, and we had some big problems. Even voice over IP telephony, it's a phone. That's what I heard from the IT folks. I said, you understand, people use those phones, right? And they did not do training. They did not do change management. And wow, the initial reaction of some of those people who had to 10-digit dial, not happy about that. And so, we do have that we can bring forward and say, look, lessons learned. We've got about 40 pages of lessons learned collected over maybe 3 dozen projects over the past 5 years.
That's great. Megan, how are we on time?
We are a little bit over about 5 minutes right now. Do we want to?
We can keep going until 9:50 on this, and then we'll save any other questions till the end, because this is just
okay.
Information.
All right. Well, let's move to the next question then, Betsy. Should a change manager be part of the transformation or steering team up front? Mm-hmm. Does the Office of Business Management have a governance plan structure with a board that collaboratively makes decisions as to what projects to take on? Great question.
So we would say yes, bring your change manager on as part of your steering team up front. You get a sponsor, you get a PM, you get a change manager in about that quick of succession. We don't like seeing it put off to planning. That's too late. OBM doesn't have a governance structure that makes decisions on which projects to take on necessarily. We have a governance structure between OBM, Administrative Services, and our governor's office that looks at the management of these projects and should they proceed and continue, again, $2.5 million and over. We do some of this through the budget process too. And we did it in our capital cycle last year. We're doing it in our operating budget cycle this year, pushing back on agencies that come forward with projects. Are you ready? Have you done these steps? Are you prepared? And are you engaged, if it's a large project, with our major project oversight?
There's only a couple more faster questions. How does OBM and Lean Ohio work together or complement each other?
I would say we lean on Lean Ohio with our business transformation components. Lean Ohio has kind of transitioned to a distributed network among all our agencies. And so we use that network in the analyzing business process and designing future state. Lean Ohio has always said it's hard to be a prophet in your own land. It's hard to do this kind of work in your own agency. And so we swap across agencies for these types of business process reengineering functions. If an agency doesn't have those resources or doesn't want to go to the network, bringing a BA in is really critical to making sure that process redesign occurs.
Wow. And do you use ProSci for change management?
We use ProSci. We have several ProSci trained people. We did a big battery training about 3 years ago. We also use I guess, methodology agnostic type of tools. We have involvement with ACMP, the Association for Change Management Professionals, excuse me, and even some older techniques that folks have been trained in. So our change tools on our value management website with the framework are type agnostic, except for our very first step, which is to use one of the ProSci tools. And so our projects have the expectation that a ProSci change manager will be available to do your initial analysis.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation, Betsy. Thank you.
I enjoyed sharing. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you again so much, Betsy.
I need a return.
I can actually take control of your screen right now.
So now that looks like it's her.
Why was that? Why did that happen?
I don't know. Can you?
Do you want to go to it?
I can't really see it, so
You can't see what?
the bottom.
Oh,
One second, everybody. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties on our end.
Sorry about the delay, everyone. I'm sure we will get the technology fixed in just a second.
Okay, so it looks like when we merged the decks, we had some formatting issues. So we're just going to try and pull up the right deck so that we know that our formatting is smooth, and then we'll get started. So thanks for your patience.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Good? All right. So, hi everybody, I'm Megan Brown. You're probably familiar with me if you've been to our webinars in the past. And I'm super excited today to share a passion project of mine, which is basically compiling this research on how our brains are reacting to change and why exactly it is that we're so resistant. And I want to give a very, very special thanks to Lorna Ricard, who provided some of the images in this presentation, but also was the first person who introduced me to this topic and really sparked a light in me. And so she's been a great mentor in terms of that. So let's see. So just kind of where we're going with this presentation today. I'm going to start by just giving you a basic structure of the brain, talking about it's called the triune brain model, which is basically describes the brain in a simplified way in terms of 3 levels of evolution, which we'll get more into. And then there are several brain structures that have a role in change. They're not the only ones, but we'll talk about how the amygdala, the basal ganglia, the habenula, and prefrontal cortex react and respond to change. And hopefully that will just give us an increased understanding of our human nature around responding to change and how we can leverage that to better facilitate it. So I love this image. This is actually technology called Glass Brain, which it incorporates a lot of different simulation technologies so that we can basically see those electrical impulses, which are the information traveling in our brain. So in our brain, information travels through neurons as electrical impulses. And in order for it to communicate with the next neuron, it releases something called neurotransmitters. And these are basically brain chemicals. So that electricity fires from one neuron to the next in a neural pathway. Those neural pathways are strengthened with repetition. So this electricity will basically flow like water does in a storm, and it'll seek the path of least resistance. So for our brain, that's our most well-used neural pathways, the ones that we've continually go back to and get repetitions on. So talking about those three levels of our brain's evolution, we'll start with the primitive brain or the reptilian brain. This is really responsible for things like our bodily functions, automatic motor control, our muscle memory is that is here. And it's really just concerned with the basic needs of our survival. And so some of the parts of the brain that are involved here are brain stem, the cerebellum, and then one that we'll dig into is the basal ganglia. So then the next stage in the evolution of our brain is considered the limbic system or the mammal brain. Like the primitive brain or the reptile brain, that structure we share with all reptiles, a very similar structured brain. Now this part we share with all mammals, and so that's why it got coined the mammal brain. This is sort of the source of our emotions. This is our brain's pharmacy, so it's responsible for releasing the neurotransmitters that help our brain communicate, the neurons communicate with each other. And of particular interest for us today is going to be the amygdala and the getting a delay on this, and all right, and the habenula. So there's a little bit of a delay on my screen here. Okay, so the next progression is our neocortex, also known as our executive brain. And this is associated with our working memory, our stored scripts, and our prefrontal cortex in particular is responsible for executive functioning, like strategizing, our personality, decision making, empathy. And so these are the four things that we're going to kind of go over in terms of how our brains respond to change. No one structure in the brain is responsible for any single role. They all work together in different ways. And there are many other parts of our brain that also respond to change, but these are the only ones that we'll discuss today. So the amygdala is associated with fear. Our basal ganglia is associated with habits, which is actually part of our primitive brain, which I think is interesting. The habenula helps us avoid failure, and then our prefrontal cortex can do something called interpersonal neural synchronization, which I'm excited to tell you more about. Okay, and then going back to those neurotransmitters, which are responsible for how our brain's communicating, you can kind of look at these as this top layer level is sort of our happy chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. They're not the only ones. When those are flowing, we feel good. When they're restricted, we feel bad, and we want to find a way to get more of those. then these bottom two, these are stress hormones. You most likely have heard of them, adrenaline and cortisol. And then you'll notice throughout the presentation, I have these little icons in the corner, just trying to give credit to where some of this research has come from. And I highly encourage you guys to look into some of these authors that I've been reading. Okay, so to get into the specifics, the amygdala, it's in our limbic system, and its role is really to kind of detect threats. And what happens in our brains, and there's lots of psychological studies that can show this, is that when we don't know the specifics of an outcome, we will fill in the worst case scenario. And as you can imagine, for survival in nature and the evolution of our brain, if we plan for the worst, we were more likely to survive. And so that is hardwired there for us to kind of imagine just what the possible worst thing could be. It reminds me of maybe if your boss says, we need to talk, and you don't know, and that's all they say, right? Then you're going, oh, okay, what did I do? Where is this going? What's the worst possible thing that could happen? And usually they just want to tell you what a great job you're doing. So in nature, a change equaled danger. If there was a new shadow in that bush starts to look a little bit different. That could be a predator behind there. So our brain is designed to see change as a threat, which initiates a fear response. Many of you are probably familiar with this. It's the fight or flight, but they also freeze and appease or other fear responses. And this releases those stress hormones that I mentioned, adrenaline and cortisol. So what do adrenaline and cortisol do? So initiating that fight or flight response, it directs blood away from your brain and into your limbs, because you need to be able to react quickly. You might need to run, or if you need to fight. So it's no wonder that means the effect it has on your brain is actually decreased ability to make decisions and to concentrate. Your blood pressure will go up. This can cause inflammation in your joints and muscles, and really can affect everything from the immune system to your reproductive system. Okay, so, what do we do about it? Well, starting by quieting that Chicken Little voice that's saying, the sky is falling, when we don't know what's going to happen. We need to really communicate clearly. Make sure that we're communicating the nature of the change. How does this align with the mission and our values? Why is the change being made? What is the risk of not changing? And this can be really important because people are actually more risk averse than they are gain oriented. So it's helpful to answer this in your key messages to your employees. And then not just the what's in it for me, the WIFM, but how is this going to impact the organization, the community, and the team? Because this change is going to be seen in a lot of different ways throughout the work environment. And the next thing that we can do is to kind of, ease that fear response, is to create an environment of psychological safety. And this is particularly important for leaders because they have a role in creating that culture. And if they can lead with empathy, create an environment that where people feel safe to give feedback, and open dialogue is encouraged, debate is encouraged, feedback is encouraged. This does take some vulnerability, but the payback is developing trust in your team. And trust is something that we feel when our body releases oxytocin. And that's kind of considered the love hormone. It's associated with touch, and maybe a high five in the workplace would be appropriate. But it's when people are bonding, you'll get these good feelings from that oxytocin. So I want this to be interactive with you all. If you can chime in and let us know how you create psychological safety in your own teams. Yeah, great. I see ask for feedback. That's a really really important one, absolutely. And I think not just asking feedback, but being mentally prepared that you might not always like what that feedback is going to say. Oh, having fun. I like it. Okay, I love that we're getting some interaction here. So, yeah, not just being coworkers, normalizing mistakes. And that's something that Betsy mentioned too, is this kind of fail fast, fail small. That's, I think, a great approach. I can't keep up. I love it. All right, one-on-one with staff, absolutely. Talking to the team, lots of check-ins. You guys are actually foreshadowing something that we'll talk more about. And taking time to get to know each other. Something that Lorna taught me was to encourage asking comfortable vulnerability questions. And that's really is speaking to the, asking questions that are not too personal, but just the right amount of personal depending on the relationship. Be open to experiences, be friendly. It depends on the culture. That is a great point. And I think that could fill a whole nother webinar. Culture is a complex one. Upfront conversations about team norms. Yeah, I like that. That's something I would love for us to do here. Let's see, coach to understand, avoid assumptions, dig for the details, avoid judgment, seek facts, laugh. And actually, I'm so glad somebody said laugh, because this happy chemical is not on here, but endorphins are released with laughter. So use that. Smile. That will activate your mirror neurons, which we'll talk about. Use emergenetics and strength finders to understand each other's unique styles. Yep, personality profiles are great team building. Assure that different opinions are encouraged, not penalized. Ooh, the 12 principles of agile. It looks like, so I think that some of our members might have a whole presentation that we could do just on psychological safety. So think about that for a next presentation. All right, I'm going to keep moving on. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was the basal ganglia. This is part of the our primitive brain, actually, which I think is an interesting thing about habits and how deeply ingrained in our brain habits can be. When we're learning a new habit, though, this requires a lot more energy from our brain. So as you can imagine, all those electrical impulses going off in our brain take a lot of energy. That's why the role of the basal ganglia is to reduce the amount of energy that our brain is using by creating habits where we can kind of run on autopilot to do these. So when we make a new habit and it's taking that extra energy, change can feel like a punishment. And so something that's helpful in understanding how this works and how it comes together is the habit loop. And there's 4 stages of the habit loop: the cue, craving, and craving, response. The response is the actual action, and the reward. And the chemicals associated here are dopamine and serotonin. Okay, so to dig into that habit loop a little bit more, I'll take one of my own habits as an example. When I wake up in the morning, that's my cue or my trigger, because I'm sleepy, that I want some coffee. And so the next step is that craving, the desire for the coffee and the caffeine it's going to provide, and the responses to make the coffee. And then finally, I get the reward. So what this looks like in terms of neurochemicals is that the dopamine is released upon that cue. And if this habit is rewarded and that reward is closely associated with the cue, then it will be more likely to hardwire into our brain as something that is good for our survival. So what the dopamine does is it basically gives us the good energy and motivation and the desire to go perform the activity. So you could imagine in nature, you might see a fruit tree in the distance, but it's a little ways out there. And so if you know that that tree is going to provide for your needs, it's going to initiate the energy you need to get to the tree, to form this habit, and then you're rewarded by having food. And even more so, if you can bring some food back to your community, then you might get some extra prestige, and extra recognition. This is an additional reward in the form of serotonin in your brain. So serotonin is a happy chemical that's associated with social status. And as much as we might like to think that that's not something that we're concerned with, we do have this chemical in our brain that rewards social status. And so it's the reason for social comparison. It's the reason we feel humiliated if it's restricted and we're not getting the respect that we think that we should get, because social status did have an important role in our reproductive opportunities in nature. So there was one study in Germany where they had two groups of runners, and they had them kind of follow this habit loop by creating a cue, but one group just created a cue for the habit, went running, and then they were done. The other group, Group B, they would reward themselves with a little piece of chocolate at the end of their run. And after 6 months, they found that Group B was 58% more likely to still be running. So chocolate might not be the best thing for your health. I think it is, but in this case, it could help you hardwire that habit. And what was kind of an aha moment for me in terms of change management here is that many of you are familiar with ProSci's ADKAR model, where basically experiencing a change, you go through the awareness, the desire, then you have the knowledge and ability to actually perform the change, and then the reinforcement piece. And as many change practitioners know, reinforcement is often it's often forgotten about. But if you can see that as a macro version of this habit loop, then you know that you can't really establish that change without getting the reward. So, or for the ADKAR model, getting that reinforcement. So, so my question to you all, and we'll see how much time we have for that, is how do you reward employees for the development of new habits? All right, chocolate, yes. Oh, they do it. They do it at Michelle's gym, where they give you little Tootsie Rolls, right? Well, or if you go to the doctor, they get, like, for kids, when they give them a lollipop or something. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh yeah, just, some praise. Exactly. And that goes back to the serotonin, when you think about that social recognition, and that is important to us as humans. And so if we can just tell people they're doing a great job, give them some lunch, have parties, that also probably helps with the social bonding. Thanks, mostly verbal praises, award ceremony, personal thank you notes. I love it. And, something else that can be really effective is peer-to-peer recognition. And we have something here at CDOT called the Leadership Traveling Coin. And although, people don't spend their days thinking about how they're going to get that, I think that it probably gives them a huge boost of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all those good chemicals when they do get those leadership traveling coins, and their peers are recognizing them for being leaders in the organization. Okay, so I think this is pretty interesting. We also have this little tiny structure in our brain called the habenula. And what's pictured here is actually the thalamus. So the habenula is inside of the thalamus, but it'd just be way too small for us to see. And its role is basically to try and avoid failure. So as you can imagine, in nature, our survival depended on success. And change, as we know, could potentially be a lot of opportunities for failure. And what happens when we are experiencing repeated failure is a psychological term called learned helplessness. I don't love this terminology. It seems kind of stigmatized to me because this is actually a physiological response to failure. And all of these chemicals have a role. Our dopamine and serotonin are restricted when we experience repeated failure. And the adrenaline and cortisol will release when we feel stressed and fearful about that failure. So understanding learned helplessness a little bit more, the restriction of those motivating chemicals that I mentioned actually not only suppress our motivation, right? When we talked in the habit cue about the habit loop about how dopamine would motivate you to go get that next thing, when it's restricted, then that's when you feel really unmotivated. But even more so, this structure in our brain will suppress physical movement around something that we have failed at repeatedly. And as you can imagine, your very survival is dependent on not failing. And so your body and your brain is doing everything to tell you to not do that thing, including inhibiting your physical response. So if this change requires somebody to do something new physically, and they're having trouble with it and they're failing at it, then that's kind of a double whammy. It's going to make it harder and harder to get better at that with that experience of failure. And the anticipation of failure creates that stress response that we discussed earlier with adrenaline and cortisol. When these are constantly in your system, this chronic stress will really create inflammation in your body. Some people who are stressed can probably relate. Not only do you feel fatigued, your body might feel sore. You need a massage. Our body begins to treat it like it would an illness, like the flu. So you'll want to stay in bed and take care of yourself. And really you'll see these kind of depressive symptoms like lethargy. So how can we let me first bring it back to this idea of organizational change. So you can imagine, we know that a history of poorly managed change creates greater resistance to change. And as you can imagine, if as an organization we're experiencing repeated failure around change, then we're just going to want to dig our feet in as individuals and say, no, my brain is saying it's not good for my survival to participate in this. So some tactics that are mentioned by ProSci for helping to develop knowledge: education, training, of course, job aids, one-on-one coaching, user groups, and forums. I'm not going to deep dive into that because we don't have time, but please, if you're not familiar with these things, reach out to ProSci. And then also developing ability the thing I really want to call attention to is this idea of consistent supervisor involvement. With change, these are our primary change agents. And so it's those managers and supervisors, we really need to make sure that they have the knowledge and ability as well to help their team develop the skills that they need. So let's take a couple minutes to see how you ensure that employees feel successful with change. Okay, Quentin mentions we do a lot of one-on-one meetings. Something that I would say, if we look back at the habit loop, something I learned is that habits are much easier to form when they are easy, super, super easy. Like if you want to start a new exercise routine, that you start with 2 push-ups, like so easy that it's just ridiculous. And then you reward yourself for doing that. That creates a habit and it becomes easier. Great. So some other things that people do is transparency. Yep. Celebration. At the wrap up of a project to reinforce future cooperation. Great. Be patient. I love that. Coach as often as needed. Always remain positive even when we experience failure and verbally say it's okay. Start from where we are and move to the next step. Good. That's kind of what I was saying, like chunk it into small steps, 1 step at a time. Yep. Ask your employees in one-on-one meetings. Be available. Yes, Chandra. That's something I've been trying to make apparent as well. Just being there, and we encourage providing mini tracks to training and support each other with a new habit so that it can reach all types of learners. I love that, having kind of a differentiated approach. Answer questions. Repeat the message often. Love it. Great interaction, guys. Okay, now this is a really exciting part. So to me, it is at least, activating this prefrontal cortex, which is arguably the most human part of our brain. It's where we, the part of our brain that's responsible for executive functioning, anything from abstraction to morality to moderating our emotional response. So, being able to take the impulses and the instincts that we're getting from our primitive brain and our mammal brain, and being able to moderate that response. And so for the prefrontal cortex, the change can be choice. Change can be opportunity and innovation and progress and hope and collaboration. And so that's really where we can activate a more sophisticated response to change, for lack of a better word. And so it's not coming up on mine. Okay. So is that what you see on yours? Okay. All right, so what I want to talk about is something called interpersonal neural synchronization. It looks like there's a little bit of a delay on the screen, so I apologize for that. And so, and we'll jump into how mirror neurons, dynamic resonance, and spindle neurons all play a part in activating that prefrontal cortex. And there are other ways to do that too, but this will also release all those happy chemicals we've been talking about. So how do we do this? Well, it really requires face-to-face communication, and we know that this is recommended for good change management. And to understand why is one reason is something called mirror neurons, where we can actually, let's say I see somebody drinking a cup of tea. Well, the same parts of my brain will light up as theirs are in actually drinking the tea. So that means that I'm kind of having an empathetic response to what I'm seeing. And unlike other parts of our brain that are really designed to detect threats and to avoid failure and those kind of things. This is actually more detects smiles and laughter and joy. And so, for example, if you see a little face like this, it's hard to not feel a little spark of joy when you look at that. And you know, and what I love about this particular expression is they're kind of smirking, and you can almost just see some kind of little inside joke in this baby's brain. So another thing that is super fascinating to me is something called dynamic resonance. And this is when we're together with other people and we move together in a similar way. This could be when you're collaborating and you're nodding together and your bodies lean in together. This is a way of connecting with other people by attuning our physical movement, and this triggers dopamine. Also, this face-to-face communication can trigger our spindle neurons, which are long neurons that go from our prefrontal cortex all the way back to our motor controls, and they are highly associated with empathy. And empathy is not just something that's soft and squishy, but empathy is really something that is important for complex problem solving and strategizing, being able to see different perspectives. And so essentially, what's happening here is something called interpersonal neural synchronization, where our brains are syncing up together. And this activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which basically is the opposite of our flight or fight response. And so this is telling us that we can relax. And something that's really incredible in this process is it can actually help to create new neurons in our brains, something called neurogenesis. So this interpersonal connection, we can actually co-create the structures of our brains together. I went back and forth on this question. How do you build opportunities for interpersonal connection? I feel like we've kind of addressed that. What I really want to know is, how do you get that face-to-face communication? Well, all right. Well, I know that we are running short on time, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap up. But I do want you guys, I do hope you keep these questions in mind in terms of how you can build opportunities to connect, psychological safety, face-to-face communication, rewards, and helping our employees feel like they can be successful, which is really kind of what we've got on this last slide. So here's some of the resources, and of course all of this will be posted on the website. And if we do have 2 minutes for any questions. I like that comment about just starting with something simple and laughing and being relaxed together.
You know, I was going to chime in. This reminds me of how I interview
Co-located
people.
team. Yep. Yeah, in-person attendance. I know in a virtual world it's easy to rely on working remotely and those kind of things, but we really can't underestimate our in-person presence. Okay. So. Oh yeah. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and I think that Quentin's got some closing remarks.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry, let me just flip through this real quick. Yeah, I know. Oh well.
You get a little review of the presentation. And now it's coming up fine.
Cool. So
We don't have time for open forum.
yeah, we don't have time for much open forum,
Sorry,
but thank you guys so much for your participation in today's webinar. That was really great. Really cool questions for Betsy and great participation during Megan's presentation. So, if we, keep that going, this was really great. And that this is, how we really build that community of practice that we strive for. So with that, on to any announcements that we have. I don't know if we have.
I think
too
the main
many.
thing is just, we're always looking for presenters. So please let us know in the surveys. You reach out to us directly. If I think some topics that would be really interesting came up in the chat today. So if you've got any ideas about those that you want to share, please let us know.
I believe that our next webinar will be sometime in April, and Tess, who is co-producing this one, will be producing that one.
I think we're in March.
As always, we're available on the.
Unmute the speaker.
It's unmuted.
Oh, it is.
Is it? Or can you not
Can
hear
you hear me?
No, I mean, Michelle, I think you were saying something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think our next session will actually be in March.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yep.
But as always, you can find us on the PSCP website. We'll be uploading this slide deck and presentation so that you can review it, or if people weren't here, you can always forward it out to them to share the information that we talked about this morning. So yeah, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
This
It's a
forum,
really fun session today.
This forum isn't possible without Michelle, Megan, and Claire, and all of the OPI staff. So once again, thank you, and thank you so much again for your continued participation. And that's it.
All right. See you guys next time.